Okay, I think some people are joining. So let's see. I think I was telling Emily before, this is my first time using StreamYard. So sorry if I don't get it perfect. But yeah, thanks to everybody who's joining. It's really good to see everybody. We'll give everybody a couple more minutes just to filter in. But if you have questions or things you want to share, like feel free to start dropping them in the comments and we can work those in as we go. Okay, cool. Should we maybe get started and jump in?
Let's do it.
Awesome. Cool. Well, yeah, thanks everybody for joining us. We're jumping into Big Data Energy, where we're going to break down the 2024 Electric Capital Developer Report. Obviously, like this is just an absolute beast of data, and everybody we have here, it's like a really well-rounded look at what this means for the industry. So we will all introduce ourselves, and then yeah, we'll start getting into some discussion. We will leave Q&A time at the end, so make sure you're dropping comments as we go along. We can try to take them as they come or save them till the end. But let me pass it off to Maria, the report author. She can intro herself first.
First of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm really, really excited to go through the report with everyone. My name is Maria. I'm one of the general partners at a crypto-focused VC firm called Electric Capital. I joined Electric and I joined crypto full-time in 2018. Before that, I was working on my own startup. I was co-founder CTO there. And then before that, spent some time at Microsoft. So my background is, I was mentioning this to you all before the call started, but my background is in product and engineering. That's actually, that background is pretty similar to a lot of other people at Electric Capital. All the partners have a technical background, and I think that's why developers are so near and dear to our hearts, and why we started the report as well. But yeah, that's an overview about me.
Nice. Emily, Nader, do you want to go next?
Sure.
Emily, go ahead.
I'll go for it. I'm Emily. I'm the CMO of Hype. I've been at Hype for the last 3 years, so full-time in crypto marketing. We've been looking at Electric Capital's developer report every year when it goes live, just to get insights on the ecosystem, since developer marketing is so important. Prior to crypto marketing, I did a lot of performance marketing, so data and data-driven insights is kind of my bread and butter. So I was really excited when this report first came across my desk, because it was the first time there was actually a story on what is going on the builder side of things.
Awesome. Yeah, really excited to be talking to Maria, because I've been a big fan of this report for years. So this is my first time to be able to just ask all the questions that I have. But my name is Nader. I've been doing developer education for 9 or 10 years and developer relations for about 7 years, about 4 of those years in the blockchain space. And this is the exact thing that excites me. So really happy to be here.
Nice. And I'm Claire. I'm the CMO of Aztec. I've been full-time in crypto since 2017 and a community member since 2019. Always working on pretty deep tech infra projects for the last 6 years in ZK. So this report is, I was telling Maria earlier, marketers say that the Super Bowl is like their big day because of all the ads. This is crypto marketing Super Bowl for me, where we just get so much cool data and stories to dig into. And yeah, really excited to get to talk to all of you about it and like get that 360 view. So I guess like jumping in, Maria, you're kind of the star of the show. And I think we're going to be peppering you with questions, but we did kind of want to get a sense of like, just tell us a little bit more about how you started the report, how long it's been going on, just your background in doing this and putting obviously so much effort into it. I mean, it's 200 plus pages.
Yes, it is. Well, so this report got started in 2018, and back then, this report started as something just for ourselves, for our team at Electric Capital. Back in 2018, what we noticed was there was a lot of analysis and a lot of data around price action, but what we were really interested in were some of the fundamentals that were that could be a leading indicator of what's happening in crypto. As I mentioned, we all have technical backgrounds at Electric as well, and so this is something that we were paying attention to. And what's really, really special about crypto that I think it doesn't occur to a lot of people, but crypto is significantly open source. Bitcoin launched as open source code. Ethereum is open source. Most of the most important projects are open source. And so it gives us unique insight into this, multiple trillion-dollar industry in terms of what's actually happening. What are people building? How often are they building? All of these signals is something that we have access to in a way that is not transparent in other industries. And so that's really the driver for the report. We firmly believe that developers are a leading indicator of value creation. Developers not only build the applications that bring in users, but they also build tooling for other developers. They improve documentation. It really all starts with what developers are paying attention to, and so that's why we pay attention to the developers. And I think that actually leads into a really big caveat, and I hear this a lot where people are a little bit confused about where the numbers come from. This is only open source code, right? So, and the way that we get this data is we have a open source taxonomy that 829 people at this point have contributed to across the crypto community that submits open source repositories into different ecosystems. And so they'll say things like, hey, this repository belongs to EigenLayer, or belongs to Aztec, or belongs to Ethereum. And that open source taxonomy, which is visible to everyone, is really the basis of this report. We look at every single commit. All these commits are open source, and we roll up these commits into developers. We try to dedupe. And so, again, this isn't malicious, but some people are committing code for multiple accounts. So to the extent where it makes sense to collapse these accounts, we do that. Sometimes there are bots, again, not malicious, but some people have automated bots running to perform kind of like routine tasks around the repo. We eliminate those as well. And so as much as possible, we kind of reduce down the number to actual real open source developers. Notably, what's missing is closed source developers, which is a huge, huge, huge group of people. Coinbase developers are mostly closed source, right? Any company with a private code base that is in crypto is not included. And so when we look at the numbers throughout the report, I think that's really important to keep in mind as well, is that this is it's indicative of a trend, but this is in no way trying to count the absolute number of developers in crypto.
Yeah, that's a good thing to point out, because I think that that's also what I've tried to emphasize when people study the actual numbers. Yeah. And I think it's obvious that you can't find all this information because it's just not public. But if you do look at the trends, that is exactly going to still correlate to activity in general. So it's a good call out.
Could I ask a question as someone who does not code? So what would, outside of private companies, what would incentivize or influence a developer to post in a closed versus open repo?
I'm sure, Nader, you might have a lot of thoughts here too, but open source code is really good for transparency, and it's really, really, really good in crypto in general, because then people can audit your code, right? People can see where the bugs might happen. And so if you want transparency, sometimes it's for security purposes, you may want to open source your code. Another reason is perhaps you're working together on a project that's not, it's not privately funded. You're actually hoping everyone contributes. Our taxonomy is a good example of this. The reason why we open source the taxonomy is we're actually hoping everyone in the community comes in and contributes repos to the taxonomy, so we have the best taxonomy possible. And it's not, if we didn't open source it, then people can't contribute, and so we don't have kind of the community effects around it.
Okay, makes sense. And then also, is it when you're tracking these different ecosystems, is it the chain itself, or would it also count apps built on that chain?
It counts apps as well.
Amazing.
Okay, so again, I'll caveat it as someone who doesn't code. So if you have a base layer and then, they're developing an ecosystem, it's going to count all the code committed to the base layer. So protocol improvements, things like that. And then additionally, anything built on top of it. So ecosystem as well. So it's a pretty broad net that you're capturing to look at like ecosystem development velocity. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. So, if we just take Ethereum as an example, we'll have Ethereum protocol developers. We'll have applications so like Uniswap developers will be counting toward Ethereum. So yeah, applications, developer tooling, anyone who's making developer tools for the Ethereum ecosystem gets counted in there as well.
And I see there's a question in the chat from Nazi. It says, does Electric have any heuristic for estimating what the open to closed source repo or commit ratio is in crypto? Many of us devs have 0 open source commits. So yeah, just curious how you kind of think about this, if it's something you thought about.
It's something I constantly think about. And unfortunately, I have no satisfying answer for this yet. I will say that, this really varies by ecosystem. I've done just through this report, I've ended up doing a lot of developer interviews, talking to developers in crypto. And I would say ecosystem by ecosystem, the amount of close to open source development is different. Cosmos, for example, when I talk to developers in Cosmos, it seems like it's mostly open source. Almost everyone is working in open source. And so Cosmos open source code is actually a pretty good proxy for what's happening in the Cosmos ecosystem. Flow would be an example where it's maybe not so good to look at open source development, because Flow is a blockchain where there's a lot of gaming development, and gaming development on the whole is fairly closed source. And so this, it really depends by ecosystem as well.
That's super interesting. Cool. Well, I'm sure we'll come back to methodologies and stuff at some point, because I don't know, I feel like it's at the base of a lot of questions we're going to have, but I kind of want to go around, if you guys are cool with it, and do some like hot takes. Like what was sort of the number one thing that stuck in your mind as you read the report? I can go first. I think for me, I was really pleasantly surprised to see India as the fastest growing geography.
Yeah.
For anyone who doesn't know, I first discovered Bitcoin when I lived in India. I lived and worked there for 2 years, and I have so much love for India. And I know, there's been some really prominent projects that have come out of India, but to really see like how I think many years of investment in, like the different universities and programs and hackathons, boot camps, it seems to be paying off. And that really made me excited. Then I have a million questions about it too, but that's my hot take. Go India. It's very exciting.
Yeah, I was really excited to see Asia. If you kind of look at the difference between growth in Asia versus North America, it was substantial. Like Asia shot up like 30-something%, and North America was down by like 30%. It was a massive inverse in growth, which I just didn't expect. I expected North America to be stagnant in that range, and I expected Asia to kind of be growing a little bit, but it was just, it's a clear signal that if you're wanting to engage with the developer audience, which a lot of us use this report to kind of understand trends, that's kind of like a place that you want to be. Another thing that really is something that always surprises me is the lack of growth that we have relative to other industries that are in software. So if you look at like AI growth, if you look at even cloud during its run up to being adopted in mobile, like all these previous sectors that are like in software that I kind of would say that we are our own sector, grew very, very quickly during like a few year period. And I feel like we're in that period where we should be growing, but we're really not. Like we're growing, but it's just like slightly, there is no just exponential curve. So I don't know why that we're not seeing that, but I thought it was just interesting to see maybe during this bull run, because like typically we see more interest, obviously, when things are good. So maybe we'll kind of see this is kind of the breakout moment, which would be great for everyone. There's a lot of demand for developers. I know that. So.
Yeah, for me on the APAC side, I think just because I am in the area right now and visiting crypto conferences, I'm less surprised. But if I was not here, that would shock me as well. But I definitely see the talent coming out of these areas right now. Something that I found interesting, interesting to your point, Nader, I look at this report every year at Hype. We use it to understand trends, to understand how we go to market for a lot of these ecosystems. And the total developer growth has been stagnant, because I remember back in 2023 or even 2022, I'm like, oh, wow, we're all competing against 20 to 25,000 developers and trying to get them over to build on our ecosystem. And it was really helpful to hear you explain the nuance between open and closed repos, Maria, because it makes me really wonder how many are growing on the closed side. The other thing I want to call out too is it looks like this year, the report is enriched with some other data sources. So I think one of them is stable polls, some other, you have some other, and NFT polls. And it looks like you have a lot more graphs here. And something that I'm always reminded of is whenever I see the usage of BSC and Tron, it always shocks me because living on the timeline on X, I rarely hear about BSC and Tron usage digitally. But whenever I visit Turkey or Argentina, I see everyone transacting on these chains. Yeah. So I think it's just a reminder that what we see on X isn't always reflective of true usage. So yeah, those are my takes and observations.
100%, yeah.
That thing you said, about, we're all competing for the same set of people. I mean, I think we all are feeling that. Like, I guess I'm curious, you obviously lead like a huge marketing agency in crypto. Like, how do you look at this report and how do you use it to kind of advise your clients on strategies that they can use? Because I think for a marketer, knowing that you're all competing for the same users is not great news. It's, it's a little... So yeah, how do you like work with your clients on this kind of thing? And how would you advise everybody listening to think about their kind of go-to-markets for 2025?
Yeah, so the way that we've used this report in the past is we start macro. And so we look at the overall trend of, okay, where are we at with developers? Are there net new developers this year versus last year? And when we're working with a specific client and the main questions we're trying to understand are, how do we attract more developers? And some ways that I use the report to answer that is I'll look at similar projects in that ecosystem, whether it's the same type of language or if it's in the ZK ecosystem or if it's EVM or AltVM. And I'll check what ecosystems were trending that year based on this report. Then we will reverse engineer, whether it's asking the client or checking on X. What did they do for the hackathons? How did they position? What geographies? How did they go to market? So what was the campaign messaging? Did they have any grants? What were those sizes of grants? So basically starting top down and then really understanding what worked well for these ecosystems to help give us some ideas on what we can do for our client. And I think actually anyone can do this, not just an agency. For example, if you're building in ZK, you could look at the other ZK chains and kind of reverse engineer what they've done.
Yeah, for sure. And okay, I want to pick on Eigen a little bit here. Not pick on. I mean, you guys were #1 in terms of like full-time developer growth this year. So, I mean, can you talk us, like, everybody here wants to know your secrets, right? So, I mean, what are you doing to attract people, but then also get them to commit code more than 10 days per week or whatever the exact metric is? Like, you're leading that up there. So, how are you doing it? Spill all your secrets.
Well, I think one thing to call out is we had a lot of growth, but relative to like the overall number of developers that you see in Solana or Base, we're still like pretty small. And I think when you like first kickstart that first year, you have that potential to kind of have that larger growth because you're kind of going like 0 to 1. We did do pretty well, but our numbers are still like relatively low, I would say. So like percentage wise, there were other teams that launched in a similar time frame that we did better than. But I think where we want to be, like, I think we're at 100 or something like that in that report. We want to be to like 1,000 next year. So that would be like a 10x growth. And I'm pretty sure we're not going to, I mean, based on the numbers that I've seen in the past, that's kind of a lofty goal. But some of the stuff that we do is like and I don't really know, maybe Maria, you can kind of go into more details here, how you measure this. But like if we do a hackathon, we encourage everyone that's in the hackathon to have all of their code open source. And then, there's a million things that we've done over the year, but one of the things that we've done, it's like if a hackathon winner won something, we create like a group chat with them. We encourage them to keep building, and we try to turn that into a company. And we had a few of these teams turn their hackathon projects into companies. And that means they're kind of like hiring new people. They're committing to this open source code base and all of the EigenLayer. The way that EigenLayer works, it's like you're essentially running open source code in an operator, which is kind of like a validator type of thing. So the code has to be open source. So that's a good thing, I guess, for our metrics, because if you're building an EigenLayer, you by default are probably going to be open source. So some of it's probably luck, some of it's some of the work that we've done. Next year, I can talk a little bit about our strategy. We're just going to double down on that same tactic of like hackathons and encouraging to build into companies with as much support as possible. We're also doing hardcore outreach to blockchain universities, clubs. So bringing them into hackathons and having them open source their code, and hopefully, continuing to build there. But Maria, this is a question I do have. If someone like goes to ETH Global and they build on Base, for example, or let's just say they build like an app that is an EVM app, and they use Base as their RPC endpoint and they commit open source, is that something that gets tracked as like a developer, or does that not really get tracked? And how does that data get analyzed?
It depends is the answer. So we try to tell from the repo and the files itself which ecosystem they're contributing to. You don't always, sometimes in the README, they'll say like, they'll literally have a list. It's like, hey, we deployed to this chain and here's the address, like we deployed to this chain. That would make it very simple. Sometimes it's not quite so simple, especially in the EVM ecosystem. So that's actually a pretty big caveat as well, is if we notice that they are contributing to 10 or more chains in the EVM, then we don't count that towards every individual chain.
Right,
because
that makes
to
sense.
us, yeah, the intent of the developer is not, hey, we want to develop on Base. It's really, hey, we want to develop for EVM. And so for those, in that instance, we'll put them in the EVM category. But if there are a lot of repos that are actually specifically for Base, right? Or it might be specifically for Base and, another L2, in which case we'll count those towards each of those chains.
I'm just, every time I feel like you get a question, I'm just more and more impressed by like the level of thoughtfulness that you put into this. And I have to say, I don't know how you do any of the things that you say. Like, I'm like, how do you do that? I'm sure there's a way with like computers and numbers and math.
There's a couple of ways. So we have these, what we kind of call searchers running at all times, that look for specific keywords or libraries that people use. And we'll use, anytime there's a new repo anywhere that gets put on GitHub, we look at it and we can kind of determine whether or not it's crypto. So that happens right off the bat. And these searchers are specific to each ecosystem, right? So we'll have an EigenLayer searcher, we'll have a Solana searcher, we'll have Ethereum searchers, we'll have EVM searchers. And these searchers will then suggest these repos as candidates for us. And then these candidates then get internally reviewed and put into each ecosystem. So that's one process. The second process we have is, again, this open source taxonomy where people are submitting pull requests, or in other words, people are literally submitting lists of new repos to us, right? And they'll say like, hey, we think, these 10 repos belong to the EigenLayer ecosystem, in which case someone on our team will review it. And then we'll say, yes, that makes sense. Or if not, we'll comment and, go back and forth with whoever submitted the pull request. And the third method, which is really useful, is a lot of these foundations will directly submit repos to us as well and say like, hey, we just had this huge hackathon. Here's a list of the repos that came out of that hackathon. Please take a look. And then again, we'll review and then have a back and forth with Foundation. But those are generally our big sources.
Do you ever have people that, and I know the answer to this kind of, do you ever have people that kind of get angry that they weren't given as much credit as they should have been, and those sorts of things that might get thrown around in terms of developer adoption from these big companies?
There's a lot of anger. Yes, I get angry people all the time. But I think that's also, Emily, to your question of like, why are things open source? That's actually also why we keep this open source taxonomy, right? I think it's easier to, when someone asks like, hey, why don't I have X, Y, and Z number of developers? I'm expecting this number. I think it's easier to say like, well, here's your, please take a look at all the repositories that's listed in this taxonomy. We use this taxonomy to pull our numbers. Do we have a disagreement in terms of the repos that should count towards that ecosystem? And that gives everyone like a really concrete starting point for the discussion. And so I think that definitely helps.
Yeah, hearing
I'm
this
curious.
conversation, so sorry. So,
Go
hearing
ahead.
this conversation so far, I was thinking it would be interesting. I don't know if this is possible, but to have another qualitative metric, because for example, it sounds like Nader with EigenLayer, it's by default open source. So we have, and plus you're here telling us, so we have like a high trust signal, like, okay, this is going to be accurate when reflecting EigenLayer. But I'm curious, since you probably do a lot of developer interviews, Maria, would it make sense or is it possible to have a qualitative score? Maybe it's like a percentage or a grade from like 1 to 10 on how
That's a
accurate
really
that.
good idea. Yeah, that's a really good idea in terms of like how open source is this ecosystem. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a wonderful idea, because then for EigenLayer, we can say like, hey, this is a very open source ecosystem, right? And then for some of the other chains, they tend to be a little bit more closed source, and that's something that we can call out as well.
Do you think that this report like incentivizes people to open source their code base to any extent? Have you had those? Have you ever sort of picked up on that or heard those comments?
Yeah, it does. And I think that's a nice thing too, right? I do think it promotes a little bit more transparency in the ecosystem. Yeah, a lot of hackathons will open source their code so that it can kind of be submitted here afterwards.
Interesting. I had that exact thought after this came out, and we've been talking about strategy. Like we were literally in Seattle planning next year's strategy for DevRel the day that this report came out. And one of the things that popped in my head, I was like, well, why don't we like optimize for this number to go up next year?
Yeah.
And everyone was like, yeah, like why not? Because it's good publicity. You know, it is great. It is, you know, to be quite honest. And also knowing that like everything is tracked through open source. It's also good. Like the more open source code available to EigenLayer developers, the better, because like there's just more stuff to be able to learn from. So it just seems like a win-win situation. But yeah, I mean, I think the question that was just asked, the answer to me is yes. Like I've already thought that, and it's something I'm already planning for all of our hackathons, just to double down on that. We're kind of already doing that, right? But it's just now a thing that we can kind of like plan and do and execute on.
I love that because I mean, it just feels so aligned with like the industry, the ethos, what we're trying to build, and the fact that this report kind of like very tangibly incentivizes people to do those things. Like, yes, they're good. We're philosophically aligned, but I do think people respond to incentives as well. There's the social incentives of, you know, being philosophically aligned, but this is a really tangible incentive. So I really like that about the report. It seems like perfectly in line with what we're trying to do. Okay, we are all in love with the report. We need to get into some spicy takes, though, is my opinion. I think we should get into this report and, you know, we've all read through it. I think there's trends. There's been a lot of talk on crypto Twitter that I think touches on the report, but interestingly doesn't bring the report in, which is very interesting to me. So I'll serve up the first one and then, you know, we can kind of pass it around. But there's the ETH Soul War, right? And this has been going on Twitter. Like, I don't know what echo chamber I'm in, but it's like, you know, Ethereum's not doing enough marketing. And then there was this tweet about the inner circle. And then it kind of spiraled from there around, is Ethereum losing mindshare and why? Interestingly, I didn't see anyone bring the report in. And there's a lot of discussion about, well, there's really no data to prove this. And I'm thinking, oh, there's some data, you know? Yeah. So I kind of want to get into it and like, Maria, maybe I could put you on the spot. Like, I'm curious to hear your take, having been really deeply in this data. And then, you know, just anybody else, like, what do the numbers tell us, you know, putting our alignments aside?
Yeah. Maybe I'll just put up some numbers that I think people got very excited about on Twitter. So let's see if I can scroll through quickly. Okay, so this one is super fascinating. This looks at the top ecosystems by continent. And, you know, just again, the caveat on the methodology here, we look at, this is based on self-reported location data, right? So this is going to be a sample of all the open source developers. If they have location data, then they kind of go into this data set. So of all the open source crypto developers that have self-reported location, this is the breakdown of what they're working on by ecosystem. And I mean, what I kind of love is the consistency. Ethereum is number one on every single continent, and Solana is number two on every single continent. And then number three is a little bit up for grabs. There are different contenders there for number three.
Number three is the most interesting part of that chart. And that was also the most controversial because everyone in my circle was like, ICP, Polkadot, like, is this real? Like, who are these people? Because everyone's in an echo chamber, and there are people building in these other places, but like, if you're not exposed to them, you assume that it's not true or something.
Yeah, definitely. Number three gets very spicy. We had a lot of we took repeated looks at the repos to see if it made sense. So this is the other one that gets referenced a lot, which is out of the total number of new developers that entered crypto in 2024, who kind of touched which ecosystem. And Solana was the number one ecosystem for new developers in 2024. And Claire, when you mentioned spicy takes, this was like the most referenced chart that I saw in terms of people having a lot of opinions and spicy takes around this. I think it's really, really important to note a couple of things. One is that Ethereum has these really incredible network effects. Ethereum has strong network effects around the EVM. And I think that is a really nuanced part of the report that, it may get lost, but is very important to emphasize. 74% of multi-chain developers work on an EVM chain, and EVM as a tech stack is almost 4 times bigger than the next biggest tech stack. So there are these crazy network effects around the EVM in general, of which Ethereum and all its L2s play a huge part. The second thing is Ethereum is still the most dominant ecosystem on every continent. Ethereum has more monthly active developers than Solana. Ethereum has around 6,000 monthly active devs. You can see it here. Solana is looking at around like 3,000 monthly active developers. So by pure numbers, Ethereum is number one. I think what people are reacting to is, hey, Solana is very much up and coming. They have the most mind share with new developers. New developers also cut both ways. I think that's the other, and I feel like Nader or Emily, or all of you might have some thoughts here, but new developers are not necessarily, this is why we cut the data by full time and also established developers, because new developers don't always contribute that much, right? New developers are just exploring. And so another metric that we really like looking at is the number of established developers, which is the number of developers that have been working in your ecosystem for 2+ years. That's obviously huge for Ethereum here. We're looking at like 3,528 developers as established, so working in Ethereum for 2+ years. And then the other one is full-time developers. So Ethereum has a little over 2,000 full-time developers. I don't have a graph for this, but I did pull this up before our conversation. Solana is looking at 582 full-time developers, which means that Ethereum has like 35% full-time developers. Solana has 18% full-time developers. These are nuances that maybe don't get picked up as readily, but developers is just like one overarching number. I think it's really important to look at subsets of this as well. I would say, on the whole, looking at the data, Ethereum is, or rather Solana is doing very, very, very well attracting new developer attention. But I think the open question for the ecosystem is, can you retain these developers? Can these developers turn from hackathon developers to ones that are writing really productive code, pushing the ecosystem forward? I think those are the really important open questions to answer.
I have a question about retention. So if you are mapping repositories and also seeing the GitHub username, theoretically, are you able to map out a Gantt chart and see how long they stay on that ecosystem?
Yeah, we can. This is, I would say something like this is a proxy for that, for Ethereum. So newcomer is anyone who joined less than a year. And so you can see this, growing very, very high in the 2022 era. And then it's now much lower. Versus established developers is active developers, again, who have worked there for 2+ years. So we have this to approximate basically the breakdown of different types of developers. And established developers overall write, across all of crypto, write 70% of the code commits. So again, that's why they're a really important segment to capture.
Wow. Another question more for the developers here. Let's say I'm a double agent. So I'm contributing to Ethereum's code, but I also want to contribute to Solana. Theoretically, I would make a fresh GitHub account, right? So it would appear as a net new developer for Solana, or do you see developers proudly contribute to both?
I see them proudly contributing to both. I'm sure some have 2 profiles maybe, but on the whole, I think developers stick to a single profile.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that if you look at the trajectory of Ethereum versus Solana, I think I might predict next year they're kind of equal, because I don't know that many people that are starting off a new project that are building on layer 1 Ethereum. I think it's interesting though, because like the discussion Ethereum versus Solana is so complicated and nuanced, because some people consider Ethereum just Ethereum layer 1, and then other people consider Ethereum like all the L2s. And if you add together all of that activity and you compare that to Solana, it's a much different story than if you just compare L1. But looking at and knowing how things are going, like that's definitely going to be overtaken either next year or the year after. And then Solana can essentially declare, oh, we are the winner of all of these new developers, unless something, kind of crazy happens. So that's very interesting discussion to kind of like see happen on real time on social media, and then be also kind of like explained in this data here. And I think the one network that might have something going that could be competitive would be like Base, maybe. They've done an excellent job of getting new developers, and they're showing up all over the place in your report as well. So yeah, it's going to be interesting this next year to see what happens,
Yeah, I think this year we actually branch out from developer data into some other stuff as well. And so this chart is probably not that surprising to everyone, but I would say in terms of usage, let's see if we can get there. Okay. In terms of usage, Ethereum has a pretty crazy amount of, again, just like network effects and dominance, right? That's not really that easy for a new ecosystem to come in. Solana is not exactly new, but for any ecosystem to come in and disrupt it is quite challenging. Ethereum and its L2s own 53% of all DeFi developers, for instance. And this year we saw this huge bifurcation between kind of what I think of as like low fee use cases and high value use cases. And it's really, really clear that Ethereum wins in high value use cases that also can attach a lot of innovation to it. So for example, Ethereum's TVL, this is Ethereum mainnet. So Ethereum mainnet's TVL is 7x bigger than Solana's. And again, just kind of blows everyone else out of the water. And that TVL is also growing, right? Like actually thanks to ecosystems like EigenLayer this year, which brought in like over 30 billion in TVL through liquid restaking tokens as a sector in DeFi. I think the security on Ethereum is really hard to replicate. The TVL and liquidity pools are very, very deep, and that's a network effect that's very hard to upset. On the flip side, and this is another interesting one where Ethereum is home to 64% of TVL since 2022. So it's been a continuous thing. On the flip side, there are these low fee use cases. We have a lot of EigenLayer data too, which might be interesting to go through. There are these low fee use cases where Solana is very much kind of owning and winning. Let's see this one. So 81% of DEX transactions came from Solana this year. If you look at NFT minting transactions or NFT volume, I think most of NFT volume, 90 something percent of that is coming from Base. Let me just reference it to make sure I have the right number. Yeah, so Base owns 97% of NFT minting volume. Solana has 64% of NFT mint transactions. So when it comes to these really low fee use cases, Base is winning, Solana is winning, and that stays very consistent. But then if you look across over to high value use cases, Ethereum has these very strong network effects, right? In TVL, and also if you look at kind of like stablecoin transfers, Ethereum has the highest value transfers that are happening. And so I think one interesting thing to think about in kind of this relationship between Ethereum L2s and Ethereum is that Ethereum is staying very competitive in these low fee use cases through its L2s like Base. And that's a pretty fascinating strategy.
Yeah, super interesting. It's like Ethereum is this base layer that has all this liquidity and it has all of this foundational elements for these other things to exist, but you're not going to see someone build like a high frequency trading platform.
Right.
Like another Aave probably won't pop up on L1, but you will see pump.fun type of stuff popping up on these L2s. And sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, whoever was trying to talk next.
No, this is really interesting. And something you referenced was just the last 3 years. And it made me think that this is your 6th report, Maria, and you're in the weeds of all the research, and you're likely seeing a lot more data than the final output. What are things that personally surprised you that maybe aren't in this report?
I think, I mean, my surprises are generally like pretty high level. What I really love to appreciate is actually just the amount of growth that crypto has, which actually goes counter to Nader what you were saying in the beginning. But I think one of the things I appreciate is the growth in crypto. So in 2015, we were looking at a little over 1,000 monthly active developers. This is when Ethereum launched. And now we're at 23,000 monthly active developers. I think that growth is really, really fascinating. You won't be able to see that growth year over year because crypto does tend to be cyclical. But what happens is every single time we have a new cycle, a new baseline gets created. And the other thing that got mentioned is, really like, hey, are we fighting over this like zero sum group of developers? And I think this is where like the new developer charts again is, hopefully I can find it here. New developer charts are pretty interesting because, this in 2024, we had 39,000 developers try something in crypto, in open source crypto for the first time. This is not counting people who maybe didn't commit anything to open source. And then in 2023, which was really kind of the depth of the bear market, we still had 45,000 new developers try something in crypto. And so I think these numbers, for me, I always find that really interesting, just the amount of new developer interest that continues to exist and how crypto kind of continues to grow over the long term.
Yeah, we're at such an interesting point to be discussing this right now too, right? Because like you see this and it roughly maps to market cycles. And we're at the beginning of a bull market ? I don't know, but it seems like we might be, all-time highs and things like that. So I guess, next year it's going to be fascinating to see like what this chart shows us. But I guess I'm also curious, like, all of us to some extent have to develop strategies around bull market versus bear market. What works for developer interest, engagement, retention, and all of those cycles. So given that we are in a bull market right now, I'd love like Emily, Nader, Maria, all of you, just to hear like, what do you think really kind of cuts through the noise, or what strategies are you employing knowing that the market is now, quite different than it was in the rest of 2024?
I can start on this one. So interesting, it would be a different case for us as an agency, since what we focus on is dependent on the client's goals and stage. And I will say that last year, when it was a bit more of a bear market, we had a lot of infrastructure projects, and there was actually a bit less developer marketing and developer acquisition. It was more refining developer docs on the DevRel side. And there was a lot more campaigns that went live, which I think was a perfect time because there was a lot less noise, where right now in a bull market, you'll see a lot of TGEs coming up this quarter and possibly next in a really noisy time period. So I may not be the best person to give an insight on how to do developer acquisition in a bear or bull market, but I will say, interestingly, yeah, last year in a bear market, there was a lot less developer acquisition compared to 2021 for us, where we did a lot of hackathons, we did a lot of developer campaigns.
Well, I could just give some thoughts. I don't really have a clear answer for this. I think fundamentally, though, you, regardless if it's a bull or a bear market, you're just focused on the core like mission and values and the like vision of the founder or what you're trying to do. And you want to just continue building out everything possible that needs to be there. So when things do kind of pick up, you're kind of ready for that. That's one general thought. And you don't really like change all that much that I would say technique or that focus, even when things get good or bad. When things do start picking up, though, I think one thing to consider, and some people might argue against this, but there are certain things that become hyped or exciting or I would say like drawing attention to developers. And if you can find a way to kind of like combine that with your product in a way that actually makes sense, then you should really, really be in tune with kind of what's going on and try to do that. Because if you can find a way for a developer to kind of build something that already is getting attention, then they can launch something that will get adoption and still be, hopefully your product has made that possible. And therefore, you're kind of having a win-win situation. So that's just some general thoughts. I mean, we've been very, very, at least for my team, very frugal, like last year or this year, I guess, 2024. We've tried to be very thoughtful about where we spend our money and where we spend our resources. And then now that things are getting better, we have kind of a larger budget to really go 10x maybe what we did last year. So that's kind of one thing. It's like, we try to be pragmatic and frugal and careful, and we're still going to be somewhat frugal next year. But because we haven't like wasted all these resources, we can kind of turn up the knob while things are going good and hopefully kind of ride that momentum, I guess you could say.
Yeah, one observation I have is it's important to not just go for pure numbers. And I'm probably saying things that, you all work in DevRel and work closely with developers, so it may not be coming as a huge surprise. But I guess just on the data side, what I've seen is often in a bull market, you have this rush of new developers coming in. And so from a total numbers perspective, you're looking great. But unfortunately, those developers tend to also not be very sticky. And so retention is quite low. So what's really, really important, I think, again, just looking at these numbers through different cycles, is trying to capture the developers who are going to stay and build something. And often that doesn't mean giving them a lot of grant money. Just looking at different ecosystems and how retention has looked over time, it doesn't seem like there's a very strong correlation between how much grant money is given out and how long these developers stay.
If we're talking about spicy takes, I would even say that if someone's first question or first discussion has to do with grants, then it's a huge red flag. I think that grants are great if someone's already interested and you want to kind of support them and make them successful. But yeah, I agree with you 100%.
That is a hot take that I like, because I kind of agree. And, there's always edge cases, right? There's always someone who's super motivated and they need that money to bootstrap to the first milestone. But yeah, I think by and large, you get kind of like the bounty hunter mentality, and then, they build the thing in bounds. So I was going to say quickly on this, like just to share a story from the trenches. I remember around like late 2020, early 2021, I was, just like kind of putting together a budget and seeing about hackathon participation. All of a sudden the market started to tick up. I had been quoted, oh, it's going to be like 30K for a sponsorship. Okay, 30K, budgeted that in. Couple weeks later, things are heating up. Now all of a sudden it's 40K, 50K, 60K, 70K. So I think my advice, especially for projects that are pre-launch, things are going to start to get expensive. Like what I think if inventory gets expensive, like if you want to run podcast ads, if you want to, anything that has limited inventory, right? Booze at a hackathon, things like that. So you really have to like preserve cash, which a couple of us have talked about. And then just think about the things that maybe could get new people interested in your ecosystem that have like a very low kind of cost to scale, right? Like stuff that's discoverable, like really great content, stuff on YouTube, things where, you don't necessarily have unlimited inventory. You get to kind of define the inventory yourself. But I see a lot of marketers in a bull market, like absolutely blow, like what I would consider like multiple years of budget. And for anyone listening, please don't do that because your project, the market always shifts down and you won't be in a good place. So.
I think the developers you attract with, who are there for the booze or the grant money or whatever it is, those are likely not the ones who are going to stick around. You want ones that are with you through thick and thin, through different types of market conditions. And I think the ecosystems I've seen be very effective. And it's interesting that Nader, you kind of pointed to this in the beginning as well, is that the ecosystem supports the builders through other things besides money. So that could be through marketing, that could be through, just debugging things, whatever other type of support. I find that those types of ecosystems tend to have higher retention.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was actually the exact question. Sorry, guys. That was actually the exact question I wanted to ask Nader, because we see EigenLayer's developer growth, and you're at the forefront of that. I'm curious, what was both the levers that you pulled to bring in the biggest awareness to attract developers? And have you noticed any changes in trends on how to create a builders program or best support them so they stay retained?
So Mert had tweeted something out the middle of last year. That was something like, he asked a bunch of developers if they'd rather have $100,000 invested in them or if they would rather have a few tweets from the founder. And they all said they want the tweets. So using that as kind of like a general peek inside the mind of a developer, a lot of these developers, they're very technical, they're very smart, they have what it takes, but they don't have the attention economy, which is kind of what we're in. And often to get that motion going for investment and for usage, they need someone there like helping to advocate for them. So something that we've done early on is kind of like put together this whole DevRel like program where we kind of tell people, if you build an EigenLayer, we give you DevRel as a service. We are a DevRel shop. We will do everything we can to help you be successful in DevRel. And what that means is like we review documentation, we share the things that they're doing, we give them feedback on their APIs, we help them with demos and all types of stuff. We bring them on Infinite Layers, which is kind of like a live stream, which has often resulted in inbound investment and usage and stuff every time we bring people on. We bring them, and a lot of people probably do this, like we bring them into all of our events that we have in person, and we give them speaking engagements. We kind of try to give them not only that BD and technical support, but we also try to give them like DevRel and also like social media almost support. And Sriram is really good about like quote tweeting people. So like if you have a developer that enters through a hackathon and they build something and then that's it, like you don't really talk to them again, that's a missed opportunity. So like we have Telegram chats, we have a CRM, we check in with our developers every couple of weeks. How can we help you? If we identify talent, we proactively offer them grants. Like, we will proactively say, hey, we'd love for you to keep building with us. How can we make it happen? Grants are on the table, stuff like that. So I think it's just about being very aware. I think bottom line, putting yourself in these people's shoes and thinking, okay, if I was them, what would I want to be successful, and trying to kind of execute along those lines and just being very, very consistent and kind of like relentless. And then next year, like I said, we're going to just kind of take what we learned this year and try to turn it up a notch.
Well, we're coming up on time. I feel like the time flew by, but did we see any questions come through in the chat? We can keep chatting, but yeah, if there's any questions, maybe drop them in, or I guess if we all have questions for each other. Did anybody have any questions?
Yeah, so Claire, I thought you had a really interesting tweet today. That was something around marketing and would you rather have a developer would you have a developer marketing or a marketer marketing or something like that? That's a cool topic of discussion because I think there's a lot of truth to that, and there's also a lot of nuance to that. So do you want to kind of like maybe remind us exactly what that tweet said?
Yes, I think I said, oh my gosh, is it bad? I don't remember what I said. No, I said, basically like, would you let a marketer write your code? I think most people are like, no, I don't want to do that. And then I was like, then why do you let developers do your marketing? And I think, my point was there's so much conversation always on Twitter about we don't need marketers. We don't need marketers. I think some developers are incredible marketers, right? And like the best partnership is like a great marketer, a great DevRel, great product, right? Like you want it all. But I think this like kind of binary of, oh, we don't need marketers at all, or, marketers are the best is not the way. And there's some nuance. So I wanted to sort of shine a little bit of a light on what I feel is, like a little bit of a double standard, right? Like no one should let me write their code. And I think by virtue of that, there's a lot of developers on, my team, every team that, don't know how to do marketing. And that's like, okay. I don't know if anybody has takes on that, but yeah, that was, sometimes I do it where it's really black and white, but it's really more because I'm like, this is what I see as like the heart of the kind of conversation.
Yeah, I think that I agree with you basically, but and it's nuanced and we need both basically. So
yeah, I see it as a Venn diagram where it's marketers, developers, and DevRel in the middle, because crypto and blockchain is such an interesting space where you are marketing to both developers and marketers. We built a DevRel department in Hype in 2021 because we realized that us people who are non-technical, so I can't code either. If I do, it'll be really poor code. I will have no idea what I'm doing. And we realized we needed to get people that can actually understand developer documentation, understand code. And we would have sessions where we get to ask the DevRels any question we have to better understand how do we combine marketing fundamentals with the technical nuance and also the archetype of a developer. For example, I learned that most of them hate ads, absolutely hate ads, have an ad blocker at all times. So how do we reach them? Because it sounds like they have a different type of personality than just a retail user.
Yeah, I think for me, like I always think about marketing. It's interesting because everyone directly consumes marketing, right? Like no matter who you are, even your age. I mean, I have little kids and they consume marketing, right? Like my 2 and my 3-year-old consume marketing, but we all don't directly consume code. I mean, we use it, but it's very abstracted away through like user interfaces. I think that creates a little bit of like maybe a false confidence that, because you consume it, you can produce it. Because I have zero confidence I can produce code, but I do meet a lot of technical folks, engineers who, think they can produce marketing. And sometimes the conversations get a little muddled where it's like, I do think we need kind of both experts in both and some really good overlap.
Yeah. I think to me, it's it's like the art of being able to tell a good story and tell it to the right person. And it takes quite a lot of practice and expertise and empathy a lot of times to be able to tell the right story to the right person.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, Maria, I want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
So when you think about this report, obviously you guys are an investment fund. Like to what extent does it inform your investment strategy?
Yeah, well, I mean, we started off, as I mentioned, we started off this report because we were tracking this data internally, and we thought, hey, I don't see anyone else talking about developer data. Like, should we just publish this publicly as well? So we absolutely do look at this data. It's one of many data sources that we look at. We tend to be pretty data oriented when we make investment decisions. So it's an input. It's not the only input, but we do weigh this if we're looking at how much developer activity a certain ecosystem has. Again, sometimes that's not the only thing that matters, right? So like, often pick on NFTs. Often for NFT collections, how many developers do you have in your ecosystem? That really doesn't matter. So it's really about the strength of your community, the excitement of everyone, participating in your community. And so developers are not always the only number that matters, but we'll definitely take it into consideration as one of our data points.
Okay, last question we're going to get into. This is maybe a little bit spicy also, and then we'll sign off because I think we're technically at time. So there are so many projects on crypto Twitter, which we've all acknowledged is a little bit of an echo chamber, but still, places like Monad, Berachain, Mega ETH, they do have a lot of mind share. We see that on Kaido, like the Twitter tool. I'm curious, they didn't appear in the report, like in any of the top numbers. So how do you think about that, right? Because I think, there's always this conversation of, does all this kind of pre-mainnet energy and attention convert into developer activity? And if so, why or why not? Maybe it's too early for those ecosystems, but what do you all kind of make of that? Because I feel like this could be a hot topic.
I mean, because they're not live yet, the closest thing I could consider looking at would be potentially ZK Sync, because they launched at the beginning of this year, right? Or maybe middle of this year, or maybe they already had ZK Sync Era live. I don't know. But I think that it's hard to gauge until they go mainnet. Maybe I should ask Maria this question before I go into that. Do you all start tracking testnet, or is it just mainnet?
We only track, so tracking testnet would be really interesting. We only track mainnet for deployment numbers in the report. And again, we only look at open source. And so for a lot of these ecosystems, Monad, Berachain, we didn't see a lot of open source repositories. And it's possible that they just haven't open sourced it, right? A lot of the apps that are building on top of these chains.
Yeah, something I was thinking about as someone that consumes a report and uses it to find insights, even if I'm not a marketer and I'm purely looking at it from an investment standpoint, like a retail investor, I would likely use the growth of developers as a proxy for how receptive that chain will be at mainnet. And I'm curious if you could use that as a pitch to say, hey, we have all of these ecosystems in our developer report. We know you're in testnet now. How many developers do you have in your Telegram group or in your builder program? You would need to add a caveat that it's not accurately reflected as open source. So it could be another column if there was that qualitative grading of how open source is this ecosystem. But it really, I was thinking how it could, this as a public good, it also sets and aligns with the ethos of our space being fully transparent on chain. And it would be cool to see some of the testnet and devnet numbers as well, as long as it is directly communicated that it may not be fully accurate, since there could be discrepancies.
Yeah, I think testnet would be really interesting. Again, deployers are not developers, and you can't really draw a straight line there between those two numbers. But testnet activity, I think, would be really, really cool to track. For Telegram and Discord, that's a little harder because it's really prone to Sybil attacks, and you can't like with any, even with looking at like Git profiles, I'm sure there are duplicates that we're not catching, but we really try and do our best. But with some of these other channels, I think it's a little bit easier to Sybil, and so which is why we're pretty cautious about showing numbers there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, well, we are like way over time. I feel like the four of us could keep chatting, but we also probably have stuff to get to. So yeah, thank you all so much. This was awesome. And obviously, Maria, we're like counting down the days to the 2025 report. So maybe we should run it back and do it again next year. But yeah, thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thanks for putting this together.
Thank you so much.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.